Aren't they fantastic? Great thinkers, great doers. So now I think I've warned them, and I've warned you. I'm going to put them each on the hot spot for a bit, or the hot seat. So I'll have one question for each of our panelists just to kick us off, and then at least 2 questions for the entire group. But what I'm looking for in terms of this discussion are for things to grow organically, and I'll invite you in soon to join that discussion as well. So I'll start with you, Craig. How do Montreal's housing affordability challenges compare with other North American cities that you've worked in?
Well, I think the story is, it's the same, but it's different. So how we go about approving things is a little bit different. There is no appeals process in the province of Quebec, for instance. There is a planning commission, but it's not really an open body to go advocate or talk to. And so a lot of deals are made behind closed doors. City staff, bureaucracy have really created this industry of the planners and the approvers are the sole decision makers in that process. And what we're seeing out of that is it takes 5 years to get a building permit. And that's an economic cycle in these days. We also have something, while we may not have an appeals process, there's a referendum bylaw in the province, and they're trying to get rid of it now. But if a rezoning happens in your community, there are as little as 13 people could vote no in your community against the rezoning, and then you're starting from the ground up, right? And so the process is slightly different, but it's the classic thing. It's NIMBYism, it's the bureaucracy component, it's the lack of active decision making. And I like your comment that we need to have people with the microphone to have more strength in having that honest conversation, because we're often addressing those of today and not of tomorrow. And so giving them the power and strength and the storytelling to say, this is not for now, this is for the next 50 years. This is the next 100 years. Here in Montreal, we're dealing with that too, of everyone, and you'll see it, the plex, the duplex, the 3-story walk-ups, the beautiful sort of plateau architecture. Those buildings were a response to a housing crisis 150 years ago, and we are gatekeeping our communities to say that's the only thing we can do.
Right.
We need to be building 4- and 6-story versions of that now, not 2-story versions within those spaces.
Right. Great, thank you so much, Craig. I'll go to you next, Caroline. So can you tell us some more about what motivated the founding of Mission Unité, and some more about what sets the model apart? I mean, you can see you've gotten some invitations to other parts of the world already. We want to see that replicated elsewhere. We're really inspired, but how does it actually work on the ground? What are the challenges?
Well, if I come back to the vision, and I've talked extensively about Mr. Maurice and his leadership, that was the ignition factor. And he had to convince the public officials and the politicians, and he said, there's a crisis, here's something that hasn't been done, but I think it's a good idea, would you invest in it, because it's highly government funded. I didn't mention it, but it's very important. But his leadership was important too, and when he tried to convince the public officials, he said, I will guarantee the cost. So I'm asking you to invest, but if we go above the agreed, I am going to pay for it. So it became a risk-free, or almost, for the government. And so this was innovative. It was fast response, low cost, but also guaranteed investment. And so, and he has a good reputation, so they decided to go into this project. It's 50% federal government, 50% provincial government, and so the leadership, the political leadership, was very important, because also if I go to the method, I've talked about the cookie cutter. There's one building, and then we called upon 30 cities in Quebec, in the province of Quebec, and we said we will have 10 buildings to give. Who's interested? And the cities that say, I want one, well, we said, here's the building. If you don't like it, you don't take it, you know? No
Yeah.
modifications allowed,
Yeah.
and you manage for you to give us the permit in 4 months. So you agree, you give us the land, and you give us the permit in 4 months, and we start construction. If it's not something that you can agree to, and you know, it's fine, you all have your requirements and all that, but there's another city waiting in line. So that's how we chose our 10 cities. So the 10 cities, the first ones, were really the most leaders. So if I come back to your question, leadership is really, really the key. The leadership of Mr. Maurice, the leadership of the federal and provincial governments that said, yes, we need this solution, and we're willing to take the risk, which is a calculated risk, but we're willing to take the risk of this really strange idea. And then the cities that say, yes, we're up for it, in 4 months, the construction site will be starting, and they said yes, and now we have success. So leadership, I think, is really the key to it all.
Yeah. Great, thank you so much. I'll go to Angela next. So what shifts have you seen in federal and local approaches that give you hope? Because you're perching from the American vantage point. A lot of our guests here today are from the US. What's giving you hope?
Hope that immigrating to Canada is easy, because if you're able to build I'm wasting my whole life.
Planners are covered under Peace Prize, so.
There we go. No, seriously, I think one of the things that has made me hopeful really is that housing availability has become non-political. It is going to be political on how we pay for it. But a great example, and I have to check myself on this a lot, because I tend to be a little left of our current president of the United States, but the Big Beautiful Bill actually had really great things, well, maybe not great, had decent things for affordable housing in terms of permanently establishing new market tax credits, which is a tool that we use, as well as some of the expansion of the low-income housing tax credit. And so when you think about it from that perspective, and I mean, the reason why is probably fairly different than what ours would be for affordable housing, but people make money in producing affordable housing, and so, you know, people's retirement funds are in that. So I think there's a recognition that by expanding affordable housing options across political platforms is growing. And I think a lot of it really does come from, it started hitting rural America really hard, and the opioid pandemic has really expanded who needs housing and social services in a way that before it's real different when it's those people, when it's my niece, my son. And so that's the shift, and it makes me cautiously optimistic. Now we're getting ready to go into a new federal budget cycle, which now that I am back on a city level, I am hyper-focused on, because we don't know what cuts we'll get from community development block grants or home funds or any of those things. But I'm also seeing cities take the lead. So in Philadelphia right now, part of the reason you'll see me looking at my phone, our city council is coming back from their summer recess of 4 months today. But we have voted to do bonds for $800 million to fund our housing plan. And we've got mayors like mine who decided they want to do 30,000 housing units in her first term, and she's 18 months in, by the way, and I was dumb enough to take the job to do it. But you see leaders throughout the United States, Atlanta, DC, all of these mayors are taking a stand, and they're looking at what they can do within the control that they have to produce housing. And they're looking at it not just in affordable, which is important, but they're looking at the whole housing continuum, because frankly, if you don't have enough reasonable market rate units, somebody like me, and this is a real story, will come live in a naturally occurring affordable unit, and I'll be a cog in the wheel real easily. And so really looking at the full housing continuum.
Good, good. We're just getting a video queued up, although, where is Rick? Oh, there you are. Is it ready to go, or should I wait a bit?
Go through a couple more questions.
Oh, okay. Okay, because we have a special treat for another mover and shaker in the local scene is going to do a short video for us, and we'll have our panelists reacting to the video, and then of course you can consider it as well. So I'll jump forward then to another question. And I'll ask it of any of the panelists. So let me know if you want to be first off the bat in answering this question. But where do you see seeing that we all have different backgrounds. We're living in different places. You're an American convert, can I put it, to Canada. Where do you see the opportunities arising even from this conversation? Where do you see shared opportunities for learning across Montreal, Canada, and US cities?
I'll start. As someone who was a city planner for a number of years in the Chicago region and city of Calgary, and then working as a consultant for developer clients and public agencies. Canada Lands is actually a sponsor here. I work with them. They're a really great organization. The hope is, because it is becoming a non-partisan issue, I think that the commonality of this, where we can find housing variety and housing typology through the industry, where we can encourage our municipalities to take on risk, low risk, but risk none the matter, and prove themselves and to deliver things quickly. If they can get something across the board in 4 months, what else can you do, right? And so I always like to lead with carrots and not sticks. And so how are these sort of tools, I think, are really great opportunities to say we can touch it, we can feel it, we can know that the world's not going to collapse if we do a 0 lot setback, or if we go from 4 stories to 6 stories in a community. If there's that marquee catalytic project, if you're honing in on 36,000 units, what do those units look like? How are they innovating, each project innovating in that space? In Canada, one last thing. In Canada, we're venturing on this notion of modular housing, manufactured, and the new era of building housing, not to replace our current development industry, but to supplement it. And that's not just double wides and single wides, that's 6-story multifamily. That's providing seniors housing, that's providing studios and 3-bedroom units. This is going to be the real exciting piece. We are a wood nation. I'm sure you're from the States and you've heard that softwood lumber tariffs are impacting construction costs. Well, we're reversing that and saying, how do we use our own softwood lumber and manufacture within that?
Okay, I guess I'll chime in a little bit. I think one of the things that I can speak personally, having traveled so much in the last 2 years, being president of APA, and just having these conversations and hearing what is working in other countries. You know, I think I went to a timber conference, which was super interesting, and a mass timber conference, and just seeing what other countries and what other cities are starting to do with mass timber, specifically around affordable housing. I thought it was odd that they wanted me there. But it is a cheaper way to produce affordable housing, and they wanted me there to give some validity to that, and I learned a ton. And it's not something I would have known about because it's not something we're doing. And so as I think about the challenge ahead of me with the city of Philadelphia, any of you who've not been there, Philadelphia is old, very old. We've got narrow streets. We were built to pretty much house 2 million. We've got 1.5, so we've got the space to grow, but we have an adversity, which seemed odd to me coming from when Seattle was like a single family city versus what it is now. Philadelphia always seemed really dense to me, so I was shocked at the number of people who are not comfortable with more than a row home. And even around our transit lines, they're not necessarily comfortable with 4- and 6-story buildings. And so, you know, I think seeing examples like you were talking about that's happening quickly is just amazing to me, and just thinking about how can we duplicate that. And then when we think about barriers, I mean, I sit on the Chicago Zoning Board of Appeals, and if you ever want to talk about a barrier to anything, it's a ZBA. And I've also sat on Seattle's Planning Commission, also a barrier. So thinking about, like, what are those policy things, and how do we get in alignment to make things quicker, and seeing what's working elsewhere gives me hope that somebody's figuring it out, and we don't have to recreate the wheel.
Thank you for inviting me to the 2025 Montreal Land Economics Gathering. It's a pleasure to be able to speak to you. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you in person. As you all know, we're living through a time of a lot of uncertainties, and I'm recording this video prior to your conference, so who knows what uncertainties you'll be facing by the time you're meeting here in Montreal. As you probably know, I am privileged to be a member of the National Housing Council of Canada, so I know just enough about housing to be dangerous. But I also serve on the Urban Planning Commission of the town where I live on the island of Montreal, so I also know a little bit about urban planning, maybe just enough to be dangerous. But I want to talk about the fact that a lot of people in Canada right now are talking about building a lot of homes and building them a lot more quickly as well. So we're looking at trying to find ways of doubling or better the home building capacity of Canada in order to accommodate the needs of Canadians. We need more housing. I think we all understand that we need more housing. But one of the things that I think you see if you walk around in any one of our cities is the visible homelessness that's exploded in our country. So when we talk about building homes and we talk about land use, we really need to be talking about a broader social challenge that we're facing, which is a challenge of affordability. And to the extent that your conference talks about affordability, I think you'll be on the right track, because it's not just about building homes or even about building the right kinds of homes. It's ensuring that Canadians across the board at all income levels can afford to live, because Canada is one of those rare places in the world that has actually legislated the human right to housing. And so we need to act on what we've said we believe. And there's three things that I talk about when I talk about the need to ensure that we deal with the challenge that's increasingly evident in our cities and towns of homelessness. And that is, first of all, making sure that we plan and that we work upstream, because if all we're doing is providing emergency services and not doing prevention, we're never going to get to a solution. The second thing that we need to do is we need to ensure that the ecosystem of care that provides the services that are needed by people experiencing precarity or homelessness, that is efficient. It's something that just emerged in the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century, and we really need to take a good hard look at it and say, is it configured the way it ought to be? The third thing, of course, is building homes, but the building of homes for people who are struggling to make ends meet needs also to include the aspect of wraparound supports, because 4 walls and a roof in a suitable location is good, but we need to make sure that we support people who need to stay in housing. So I want to wish you a wonderful conference. Thank you for listening to me for a couple of minutes, but I wanted to put those little points out there. Land use is important. The economics of land use is a critical topic right now. And in fact, maybe for the first time in a good many years, this is something that's rising to the top of the agenda in all of our governments all across the country. So I think this is an opportune time for you to be discussing this, and I wish you a wonderful conference.
Excellent. Good. Okay, thanks everyone for your patience in showing that video, and thanks so much, Rick, for setting that up. I'm glad we had audio there. So Samuel Watts is the CEO and Executive Director of Welcome Hall Mission, or in French, Mission Bon Accueil, and he's also involved quite heavily federally in trying to help solve the planning, the housing affordability issues of our day. So I'd like to ask our panelists to give any comments that you have on the issues that he raised and the priorities that he's identified, if anyone wanted to jump in.
Oh, go ahead.
No. All well and good. I think these are absolutely needed conversations. I will say we're 20 years behind in the conversation. In the context of Canada, yes, we legislate that housing is a right, but we don't follow through with that. And in the later 80s, early 90s, the Mulroney government downloaded the responsibility of social housing development to provinces. And the province then said, yeah, we'll pick it up. At that time, Canada was building 15,000 social and non-market housing units across the country annually through a federal program. That cratered to about 100 annually. And that happened for 30 years. And the provinces kept wringing their hands, and cities kept saying, well, it's the province's responsibility, even though cities are having to deal with it. So we're in a 30-year crisis that we've created ourselves because through a series of conversations of, well, the private sector will pick it up, or we'll do the Housing Affordability Fund, or we'll download it to our community groups that will deliver these housing units. And so we've created a crisis that took 30 to 40 years to create, and we're trying to solve it in 10 years. And that's where we're at. And so I'm glad we're having these conversations. We have to bring the empathy into the conversation. We have to continue to drive into that notion that housing is a right. Housing is a cornerstone to every economic model. If people don't have a consistent place to live, they can't participate in the job market, they can't access the services that they need, they can't even get a bank account if they don't have an address. And so we have to look at it as a cornerstone and not a commodity. We have to look at it in terms of there's all kinds of housing to build, there's all kinds of financing tools to make that happen. And I just hope that this conversation continues, because when times are good, we forget. And now that times are not so good, it is the corner, it is a large majority of our conversations.
Continuing on that wave is housing, the number of houses required in 15 years from now is just mathematics. You know, it's not a whimsical thing, it's not an emotional thing, it's a mathematics problem. And there are scientists called demographers, and you can foresee it 30 years ahead. Of course, there's going to be a certain variability, but investing in social housing should not be something that one government does and the other one doesn't, and then when there's cuts, we cut. And you know, because when there's cuts, it's because there's poverty. You know, it's a difficult situation, so you need more of social housing. So it should be a plan 30 years in advance, and we should have a regular inflow of social housing, and it shouldn't be left to, you know, this government or that government. It should be separated, because the housing needs are plannable, so they should be planned.
And the private sector will pick up the other pieces, right?
Absolutely.
Like, I think there's always that conversation in the market of, well, what's the return on investment, or what's the equity within that space. The dirty secret we're not talking about here in valuation is, and the reason we get a lot of NIMBYism is, well, my home tripled in value in the last 7 years, and I leveraged that to help my child pay for their house. Yeah. And if my value goes down, then I'm underwater, or I was banking on that as my retirement investment. I hear that a lot of them. What are we going to do with retirees that their valuation of their home was their retirement? Maybe we should have a conversation of, why is your home value your retirement nest egg? And what are the tools and ways that we can bring those valuations down while catching those people that may be caught up in that spectrum?
And I would push back and say, are they coming down? Because data has shown that affordable housing being built next to you doesn't devalue your population.
There's that too.
Your valuation of your home. So, you know, I think there's a whole lot. I think the one thing that I took away from that I don't hear enough people talking about it, particularly when you start thinking about ending homelessness, which is a thing we could do, particularly in some of the richest nations in the world, is the wraparound services. And I can only speak for the United States, and prior to my current role, I worked for the Corporation for Supportive Housing, which is a national nonprofit and lender that does permanent supportive housing. Is there's no real way to fund the wraparound services. There's just not. It's crazy to say you can easily solve for building affordable housing than you can for providing permanent supportive services for the lifetime of a project. It doesn't work to bring people off the street without wraparound services, but we haven't been committed to really ending homelessness because we are not committed to providing those services.
And by the way, study after study says wraparound services and housing first policies save 30 to 40% in overall taxpayer contribution to these components.
Absolutely.
It is not a social commentary of someone's lifestyle or how they got there. It is pure economic fact.
Yeah, and we're in capitalist society. I don't know why it's an issue, and I think it's also really surprising to me that the term housing as a human right has become a bad thing. I feel like that should just be basic understanding.
Right.
And it's not. And you see that you see people of all political walks of life taking issue with that because of somebody too far left or too far right has said it. And so, you know, I think when we comfortably get to a point where we think about housing as a human right globally, we can start seeing the prioritization. And, you know, my whole thing to all elected leaders is talk is cheap. It really is. So your actions are going to speak louder than your words. And when you're walking down the street and you're seeing somebody shooting up and they don't have anywhere to go and you're okay with that, that should be a problem for everybody.
I am going to take moderator's privilege here because I do want to open up to the group. I know, as I said, that we're a lively group. So do we have a roving mic or anything? We can use mine. Yep. And then I'll just say, just because I recall that Craig and I had a really great conversation the other week about housing affordability. I think the point he was making was not, of course, I think we can all agree that if there's an affordable housing project built next to your building on the same street in the same neighborhood, it won't devalue the property. I think we could all agree on that. That's a myth. But of course, there's the connection between supply and the cost of your nest egg. And so often the very same people who are upset that their grandkids might not have an affordable place to live don't want to see any devaluation of their own nest eggs. And they don't see that there's a correlation there. So that's where the pain points are that we often don't talk about. And I would love for us to talk about that more, but I'd love to open it up to our audience at this point. I see a hand over here.
An affordable housing developer, they should be good.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Just pick it up, on and off.
Hello?
Okay, there it is.
There we go.
Hi, I'm Jewel Walton with the Chicago Region Chapter. Proud to have some alums on the panel there. Excuse my preamble, but I kind of have to give some context to my question. So in Chicago, we're talking a lot about affordability and regulations tied with affordable housing funding versus the cost of market rate construction. So just for generalization purposes, what's been touted, a lot of LinkedIn talked about this, where there's market rate housing that's built right about $500,000 a unit. However, affordable housing, which unfortunately my company was on, it was the poster child for an article in Crain's Chicago, where it's $750,000, $800,000 a unit. So we're talking about a delta of $250,000 to $300,000 in regulation that you're paying for. So my question in that realm is that, particularly for you, Angela, I'm curious to know with Philadelphia and the $800 million that you guys have to set aside as a bond for affordable housing, how are you trying to cut through the noise of paying a ton of costs for regulation in that? And then similarly, just because I'm very curious in Canada, how have you been able to cut through the noise to do that, especially for your development where you're like, take it or leave it? And I'm like, taking notes. Take it or leave it. And really cutting through the noise to deliver a product that you can just deliver over and over again, that cookie cutter approach.
I started day drinking. No, I'm kidding. I think one of the things that I should have mentioned, well, I'll mention now for Philadelphia, is the mayor issued an executive order similar to the one in LA that really asked every city department to look at what are their regulatory barriers that are impediments to housing. And that's from permitting, licensing and inspections, tax abatements. We just ended a tax abatement code, which is kind of controversial. And what are the things that each department needs to do to get better? And so there's not a lot we can do about, a lot of that is federal. Like, I worked in compliance of federal funds and it's a nightmare and it adds costs, all that. So, but part of the ask from those departments is to identify those things we can control and fix them. The things we can't control, to identify them so we can start a policy and lobbying for changes to those. And again, I'm trying to, find sugar for some sour lemonade. One of the things that could potentially happen with the current federal leadership is changes in some of those policies that impact cost for affordable housing development that probably could go away in a way that doesn't impact the types of things it should be supporting. And so we're trying to, in Philadelphia, have a very, she's a chess playing mayor, so she's being very intentional in her approach with the federal climate. My mayor's Democrat, our president is Republican. And so she's not been one of the ones who's out front blasting the president. And she's intentional about that because we haven't had an ice raid yet, because she hasn't pissed off the president. But she's also being intentional because she's been an elected leader for a while and she works across the aisle. So we just met with Secretary Turner. We identified a lot of the obstacles that we're seeing there. We just have met with the Republican delegation from Pennsylvania to kind of identify some of those things. We are looking at preserving 16,500 of the 30,000, 16,500 is preserving aging housing stock, and that tends to be a kind of nice space to sit in that's not terribly controversial, and just identifying the types of federal policies and funding that can support that so we don't have to use our bond fund. But it's not going to be easy, and certainly those newspaper articles that talk about the delta between a market rate unit and affordable unit never tell the whole story of why. And so we're trying to be more intentional in responding, because so often politicians are like, we're just not going to say anything, but we're trying to produce the data out there. So we started what we call Philly Stat 360, which puts out the real information. Not that the media is going to cover it, but our residents could, if they want to, actually go and find what those reasons are and see where the holes are and come up with their own opinions. But being aggressive and actually addressing misinformation is going to be the next step that we take. But I probably will start drinking again.
Kennedy?
I would say two things that were helpful in lowering the cost. The first one is the building was very carefully designed, and it wasn't. We used all the norms that normally pertain to elderly living. We used them, but we didn't apply them. So we used them as inspiration. We used them, when it makes sense, we did it. Mr. Maurice has been building houses for the elderly for 30 years, so he has a big credibility. And he offered, I say he because I wasn't there then, but he offered this building to the government, and he said, this is what I'm going to build. It's not as per your requirements, but I know this is good, it's going to be low cost, it's going to be good quality, and it's going to be quick. Do you want it? And they said, yeah, we'll take it. So that was one thing. Some people might wonder about his motives. So the Mission Unitaine is a not-for-profit, totally independent from his business. It's something we receive the funds and then we build, and then we give the building to the public office boards, the local boards of housing. So our job is really to build very quickly this building, and then we give it. And so people who would be wondering about his motives, like we are not applying all the norms, but we're not doing it for profit. We're doing it because it makes sense. And so they agreed. A few things, of course, we discussed. They said, we really, really want this. Okay, but that was the main first building. The other ones, other modifications after that, it's too late, we don't modify. So the conception and a really good building, we said we don't apply all the norms, but this is going to be a good building. Are you okay with it? And then we went along with it. The other element and the intent is to lower the cost. The other element is the speed. The speed, our basic construction site is 13 months. And if you have complex foundation, then it may be, 15 months. And so our project from beginning to end is 24 months. Everything, from hello, Mr. Mayor, would you like a building, to here's the key, 24 months. A normal housing, social housing, goes from 4 to 7 years. And of course, there's a lot of lost money in the process. So every time, we ask that we have an issue with the foundation, or, the inspector of the city comes along and he says, well, this is wrong. We say, well, you have 24 hours to resolve this. And we had the electricity board that wouldn't come and plug. The building is ready to welcome 100 people, but the electricity board doesn't have the time to come and plug it. Who do we call? The mayor, the deputy, the minister, and we say, let's plug it. And 48 hours, the electricity board comes and they plug the building, Because it's a collective project. it's innovative and risky, so nobody wants to see it fail, you know? So there's also the fact that everybody's watching us helps us in achieving this goal. But when you do this construction sites with no stop, you never stop, ever, you always flow, then you finish quickly, and you save a lot of money.
Jewel and I are super jealous as two people who've worked in social housing in the States, because we've never had that kind of response.
So what you're saying is accountability is a key driver to this too.
Yes, and leadership.
So, excellent. I have some more questions in the back here, if a roving mic can find one of these people. I was a bit derelict in my duties. Your preamble was short and very much to the point of your question, but just to ask everyone, we want to get, the word question has the Q capitalized. So to move as quickly as possible to the question, we want to use the best
The
time.
bar opens at 7.
Oh,
Hello,
In Montreal.
fascinating panel. I'm
24/7.
from Washington DC, which is part and parcel of my question. I was a Director of Housing and Community Affairs for Montgomery County, Maryland for a dozen years. So I've had on-the-ground experience of working with builders and various things. One of Mike's comments sort of disturbed me because it raised another issue, which was the lack of a labor force or diminished labor force to build. And I'm thinking about in Washington DC, where all the ICE agents and are arresting, deporting immigrants, many of whom are the people who are building the housing. So I'm curious if you have any solutions for how you're getting more labor force to do the construction. My other second question, I guess for Caroline, one question is, where do you get the land from? And also, this gentleman who started your organization and is guaranteeing some of the funding, you know, how can that be replicated? Where are we going to find these good guys that have that kind of experience and credibility and passion for it?
I feel like you need to start, I mean, I could talk about labor force in Canada.
Yeah, I'm not the best one for labor force, yeah. Go ahead with labor force.
Okay, so labor force has always been an issue since I've lived here 12 years. I've lived in 3 different provinces. Labor force for constructions and trades has always been an issue. They're trying to tackle that in a number of ways. One is to increase trade school training and encouraging people to go into the trades. I mean, if you're an electrician in Calgary, you can make $96,000 a year with less than 5 years experience. And the other two is utilizing things like the temporary foreign workers program. However, with a rapid increase in immigration and the housing crisis that we are currently in and a softening job market, there's been a real push to pull that back recently. It sort of flooded the market with labor that now Canadians and landed residents are struggling to find work. So I think it's always in that space. But what I think the promise is you know, we're building the same way we were doing the last 150 years. You have to be on site. You have to have a roving crew of construction workers. And this push to scale up our manufactured housing piece, well, I think it's the brighter spot is, you know, we can build in regional centers the other half of our housing supply. It frees up the market to allow those other skilled trades that are still serving in a traditional market, and we can focus that energy in geographic regions rather than every city competing for those spaces. So I think that's going to be the interesting thing coming out of this is these regional centers of trades that are centered around these manufactured housing components.
If I can just jump in here, and first, thank you for the work you did in Montgomery County. There's a lot of great stuff happening there, but I think one of the things that we're finding, particularly as we are talking about manufactured housing, is the battle with the unions.
Yeah.
And for people who live in union cities like I do, we've got to solve that, because I do think manufactured housing, it's not your grandma's trailer park, is a real thing, but those of us live in strongly union cities that probably have funded every elected person's seat, we have to kind of tackle how do we make them comfortable with that as well. And so I think that's going to be part of the conversation, because there has to be a solution that encompasses both.
And I think to that point is the manufactured housing trades people that are working inside these facilities can be unionized as well, that may not
Yeah.
live in your city, right?
Yeah. And
so
then
that
some of us have
family-
resident, yes, and some of us have construction requirements for a number of people to be in the city, so yeah.
Sure.
So there's a lot of policy stuff, but I do think you're
The
right.
on-site construction piece is different than,
Yeah.
say, the wiring inside, and also
They fight us.
it's filling the gap,
I
right?
get it.
You're
They're
gonna,
fighting
you're gonna,
us. It's ugly.
well, we gotta work together.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
Absolutely.
very pro-union, but we gotta figure this out, and we have to open the door and say, how do we welcome more people into your union?
That's another drink.
Yeah. Well, we here in
passed up the
Quebec
drink
are
at
very,
Generous with alcohol.
we're generous with alcohol, but we're also generous with our unions, and I work on Rene Levesque, with this main street down here, and I'd have to look out my window at least every other day to see what protest is going on, because I worked across the street from the Government of Quebec building. And so I think here it's a very different conversation, but
Yeah.
it's a good point.
Excellent. Do we want to move to the second question?
Well, the easy part to your question is the land are given by the cities. It's part of the request. And when we called the 30 cities and said, we will have 10 buildings to give, those who are interested need to give the permit in 4 months. That's the tough part, but you also have to give the proper land and the tax credit for the duration of the construction. So, Mission Tene, we pay no tax, or if we pay, they have to give us a grant to pay the tax. But we also asked for a 3-year tax cut for the ones that will be receiving the building, and so that they could create a fonds de prévoyance.
Like operating fund?
No, reverse.
Oh, reverse.
So that the 3 years tax cut, they take that money and they put it in a bank account.
Oh, savings. Yeah.
Sinking.
Yeah, and Mr. Maurice gave $500,000 per building. So it starts with 1.2 million in their bank account, and this is gonna increase with the interest and all. And so when they need to repair the roof or whatever, they have the money, replacement fund. And so,
more of him.
so that's the other part of the question. So how do we find more of those? Well, philanthropy is and I know it's very, there's a high interest of philanthropy towards housing in Canada, and I'm sure it's the same in the US, because there are people who have money and I think that they have money and they want to invest it, and they want to make sure that it's well invested. And I think that it's sometimes complicated for them to know, because in philanthropy, and I've been in philanthropy for longer than in construction, and they want to know how much social good do they get for their money, and in housing, when you give 1 million, how many people's life have you impacted? Maybe, well, not that many. And so there's been groups of philanthropists who are thinking amongst themselves and are creating funds so that they can, offer loans, patient loans, or they can have the seed money for the project. So philanthropy is really, in Canada, is really thinking of how can they empower the housing developers, the social housing developers, how can they help them, but to make sure that their money goes the longest way possible. And coming back to the cost, there was a social project that was put by women who are victims of violence last December, and they wanted to create a house, and the cost was $800,000 per door. And the politician said, well, no, it's too expensive. And so they were accused of being not feminist and not caring about the women, but it's just too expensive, make sure you revise your project, and maybe at 500K, it will make sense. So sometimes philanthropists are a bit lost, who are the key players in whom they could invest. And so in Quebec, there's been also this restructuring of the social housing, and there's an association for high high volume social housing. So there's 5 bigger members, and we are one of them, who develop more than 100 units per year. And now there's 25 members of that association. So it gives kind of credibility to those people who develop not-for-profit social housing, but with a private sector approach type of thing, you know, really thinking about the cost and the velocity.
So, sorry.
Yeah, I'm not. I can talk more.
It's very hard to be the moderator because I'm so fascinated by everything, especially right in the middle of this success story on our very doorsteps. And I do hope that we can go out and see one of the projects, I think, under construction locally, potentially. At the end of this conference, we might be able to just go by. But I would be remiss if I didn't move to questions again. So one other thing, so the word question is capitalized, but it's also singular. So we only have a couple more minutes here for general questions, so please just a short singular question.
I have 5 questions, I'll make one. When we were in Barcelona, this same gathering is in Barcelona, we saw some really beautiful affordable housing. And what intrigued me the most, and maybe a question to the people from Madrid that are here, the Canadian attendance from LAI and the American attendance for how do you qualify, they could not even understand that question. So it got me to wonder, you know, globally, is there policies at a nation level that we need to be considering? Are there model nations that deal with this better than Canada? And Canada's better than the US because you don't have local zoning like we do. But the question is really for how do you know, why couldn't you understand that question? Or how does Barcelona figure out it's affordable housing? And it's much nicer. We're building a lot of crappy housing in the US to keep the cost down and justifying that on a homeless basis.
Okay, sorry, I'll take privilege again. I think we're gonna do the questions of our friends from Barcelona at the reception tonight, rather than taking time away from our panelists, because we're very, very short on time at this point. But that's a really good point that you raise, and it harkens back to, I think, the conversation we're having about how can we learn from each other. It sounds like we're all scratching our heads and thinking about exactly that. There are things that other jurisdictions have solved, and we can learn from those. Do we have one more very quick question? I know there's 2 people in the back that have had their hand. Oh, no? Not allowed? Tea time?
It's really fast.
One question.
Well, I have 2 hands in the back that have been up for a very long time. Is that okay?
Right, I got a question. I'm from New York City. There's nothing more complicated than doing business in New York City.
That's true.
Particularly building affordable housing. But I have seen, and I've been doing it for many years, I have seen housing done, affordable housing done at one cost, a very low cost, and when tax credits came along, at a very high cost. The question I have for everybody, for anybody, is how do you, and the key was organizing a process that's accessible to small builders, to efficient builders. So I don't think what the examples that you give about a single person doing this, I don't think that's outrageous. I think it is possible if you organize a process which includes pre-approved designs, financing that's accessible and simple. It's been done in New York City, and the differences was 2 to 1.
Okay, so we have a great question. I think I understand it to be how could you support small builders in achieving this?
Organize a process that allows you to do things in 3 years or 2 years versus 4 or 5 years.
Right. I think we did partially try to answer that question before, and you can answer that question now, but because we are so short on time, you can choose between answering that question, or if you had one wish, this is quick draw. If you had one wish, one regulatory change that could unlock progress, in your city, province, or state, what would that be? So quick draw. I think it's all the same question, really. It's how do you unlock affordable housing? Go.
I mean, it's one big regulatory change. Sorry not to say that. But it really comes down to zoning because the building codes are up to date to make that work. It's the zoning codes, the Byzantine process in which that we've created ourselves as planners that are really creating a lot of these issues. And to your point, 75%, and it's just as high here. Single family only zoning within our communities has really driven this sort of process.
Okay, good. Quick, good job.
I think in social housing, because if you want to offer very low rates, you have to have government funding as part of your equation, and the government funding is unpredictable. And I think that the predictability, you're better off with a bit lower investment, but predictable than having woo. And then the builders, the developers, no one can know what's coming ahead. So if you have a stable inflow of public funding, then you can predict and you can invent nice projects, and there's predictability. And in construction, predictability is lowering costs.
Excellent. I would love for us to have more time. I feel like we're just scratching the surface. I have so many more comments I wanted to make about the commonalities and differences I heard up here, but I will let that go, I promise. But we want to thank our panelists for incredible generosity.